Hey guys, Coach Victor Obledo, and today we're going to talk about your stiff and sore low back. Now look, 9 out of 10 people that come in my door start working with have some issue with their back. It's a massive problem, and solving it is kind of nuanced, but I'm going to help you understand why your back is causing you problems, potentially the reasons why in this video. Also, the easy stretches that I integrate on the daily for me and my clients to make sure that they stay healthy and give them a better understanding of what's going on. So I'm here to help you understand how to weave all that in and why your back is chronically sore. So let's get started. Before we get started, please like and subscribe this video. If you have any questions, please leave them down in the comments below and share it with someone that it might help. Most people, the biggest problem is inaction. Rarely is doing nothing the best choice. So let's talk about pain in the low back, or soreness or stiffness. Like I said, it's high numbers of people. It's the number one reason people aren't going to work or fail work. And there's something there that we are not addressing, the elephant in the room. The elephant in the room is a contribution from stress that we're talking about. And we'll get into that little portion later. But first, let's talk a little bit about the back and why it's so difficult to diagnose. If I have a client that comes in to my facility or does a Zoom session where I'm trying to diagnose their back, it takes some time and understanding the anatomy that's associated with the back. There's so many levels, much like the core or the anterior part of the abdominal wall. It wraps all the way around. So some parts of our core don't stop here, right? So your deep muscles of the transverse abdominis wrap all the way around like a tire, especially the internal and external obliques. They wrap around the back. Then you have the muscles of the spine, the paraspinals, the muscles that are adjacent. And we just generally say the term paraspinal because it's adjacent to the back, but it also ends up being a multi-layered there as well too. And so we just say paraspinal, but it could be one of 3 major areas there, as well as this massive tendon sheath that covers our low back. Now, why it becomes so challenging is because why it becomes so challenging is because we end up with compensatory issues. So if you pull a muscle, even in your calf, you're going to walk funny, and that'll integrate itself and start to feel it in the low back. And that's one of the biggest challenges as we're diagnosing the issue with the back. Plus, from the anterior portion, the hip flexors originate in the lumbar spine. So a lot of people will stretch and stretch their low back only to never get a result because their hip flexors are overly active and tipping it from the anterior part of the low back. So personally, I have had some issues with my low back, especially when I'm doing things like cycling a lot or practicing a lot of jiu-jitsu. For mine, it was always linked with an overactive seated position. Now, if you work or seated or flexed hip is what I'm more alluding to. Jiu-jitsu involves us often playing, especially in a guard position. The knees and the elbows are connected. We're in that tuck position. And then obviously cycling, we're in a piked position the whole time. Couple that with potentially sitting for extended periods of time, your hip flexors are likely to get tight. And so I encountered my issues with my low back, as well as lifting heavy weight, having a acute trauma from deadlifting. And it helped me to understand deeper what most people might be going through, is that it's very nuanced. You can do a little too much, you can overstretch, and if you're anything like me, you jump into something all in like, okay, well, I just gotta stretch, only to injure myself in the stretching as opposed to healing. So that's why the back is so hard to diagnose. And we're gonna go into a few of my favorite stretches and why they're important. But first, it's important that you match the breath. Now, this is big, guys. Most people, before they go into stretches, or even when they're in the gym, they're not being aware of the state that they're keeping themselves in. Don't just feel like you're checking it off the list. If you are getting into the gym and you're not in a calm, relaxed state, there's a good chance you're not going to send that message to those muscles, those tendon sheaths, that fascia to relax for you. And all of those layers of tissue that are in the low back need to be in a relaxed, non-threatening state. So I always recommend people, before they go lay down and do these stretches or stand and do these stretches, take a couple deep breaths in through the belly and exhaling out, just to kind of send it like, okay, I'm taking care of myself, I'm relaxing. Not you're just checking it off your list. I'm doing it. I have no idea why I'm not getting better. So if you bring a little level of mindfulness into your training and into your recovery, I promise you it's going to get better a lot faster. So the first stretch on here is a poor man's traction. Now, in the video here, I'm doing it off a TRX with my hips sagging back. This allows us to kind of totally relax. The grip is holding on to the handles and our hips are back. That allows us to kind of get a good stretch and send a message into the low back that's non-threatening. The fascia tends to relax. You're pressing into the hips. The hamstrings are getting a little light stretch. Now, you don't have that. You can use a door frame. You can use a door jamb to kind of mimic the same thing. The most extreme version of this, my favorite, is just to hang from a pull-up bar. That can get the same kind of traction depending on the stiffness that you have. It's all about sending a message to the low back, the fascia in the low back, to kind of relax and start to get the body used to, again, no threat. Number 2, the supported forward fold. Now, this is a big one. Now, currently I'm sitting at a chair. You could actually do it sitting off of a chair, as well as leaning my hips up against the wall. Leaning hips up against the wall allows us to take a little pressure, get a little slight bend in the knee, and get into the low back a little bit more. Now, here's another little important tip. Every person is built differently, if you didn't know it. So what I might do and feel it in my back does not mean that you're going to feel it in your low back. So play around with the stance, the openness of the stance, and the bend in the knee till you feel like you can relax into the low back and stretch out some of those paraspinals, stretch out some of the fascia in the low back. Number 3, a classic spinal twist. Now, for this one, you're bringing the knee up and across the middle line of the body. Now, you can use blankets to support it. You can prop up yoga blocks to make it so that it can support it and you can breathe into it. That spinal twist, make sure you're doing both sides and ease into something that's manageable that you can hold for some time. And number 4, feet elevated hamstring. Now, why I like the hamstrings is because most people that come in to my facility that have low back issues, their hamstrings are extremely tight. And it's usually a compensation because their back is bothering them. Those hamstrings bear down to try to do a little bit more work. So just a classic foot elevated hamstring is very, very effective. Depending on the level of discomfort, you can play around with the height. You don't need to lean forward. In the video here, you'll notice that I am leaning forward slightly on the video, but if you're getting a hamstring stretch just by placing it up on a chair, you don't need to lean forward. What's nice about all these stretches is that I've found over the 30 years of training people is that most people can't screw these up. So I tend to pick the ones that they can't screw up and they can hold for time. As far as the duration associated with any of these stretches, I highly recommend you do closer to a minute. You do a minute of each one of these, I promise you your muscles are going to have a tendency to want to relax and decrease threat. The deeper you want to go into a stretch, the longer you need to hold it. The longer you do it, the more you'll settle into your breath, the more you're likely to not be in a high level of pain. Now let's get into that connection with the stress. Over the years of doing this job, I've had a lot of experience working with people. And 100% of the people that I work with that experience a low back injury, maybe 99%. It's more there's always a significant amount of stress that's going on in their lives when their back starts talking to them. And so that alone has made it so that I've started to really focus on knowing what's going on in the life, because it'll give you an idea of like, oh, this thing's building. Now, everyone is wired different. So if you have a low back issue, well, then there's a chance when stress kicks up, your low back will start to bother you. If you have a shoulder issue or neck issue, the same thing is true. So as you start to trace increasing levels of stress, make sure that you're spending the time stretching using these stretches. If you have any other questions, please make sure you leave them in the comments below. If you like this video, like I said, please like and subscribe it.